Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Delighted to be able to do a show again. I'm really sorry, it's been a few weeks for anyone that does follow regularly. I've been extremely busy over the last few weeks and haven't managed to get up here into my loft to do a show. But I'm delighted that I can do this one. Today I want to talk about what's going on in the Mediterranean yet again, and why there are still boats full of people, asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants who are trying to make their way into the European Union that are dying in the sea. We saw last week, towards the end of last week, we saw a boat with 600 plus people. The pictures of it are astonishing. Sink. Hundreds of people are still unaccounted for and thought to be dead, obviously, and hundreds are confirmed to be dead in that tragedy. And we also saw, just in the last 24 hours or so, another boat that was off the coast of the Canary Islands also go down, and it's expected that at least 30 people are confirmed dead in that incident, in that tragedy as well. Been in Brussels a long time, me, and pretty much since just off the back of what was known as the first Lampedusa crisis, when bodies were washing up on the beach from a smuggler's boat. And it really shocked everybody. And then the subsequent years until 2015, we saw huge numbers of people boarding those boats in North Africa, in Turkey, making their way into the European Union. Many, many people have died. And we're seeing it happen again, right? This is 2023. It's coming around again. And the question is, what is the European Union doing? Because a lot of these people aren't just sort of making their way arbitrarily anywhere. They're coming into the EU. And we've seen the discussions start once again about exactly what all this means for the EU, which put together a new migration and asylum agreement, came out by the Home Affairs ministers a few weeks ago. It's really about sharing the asylum requests around the EU's countries, the 27 member states. Also, it's about countries that don't want to be involved in that paying. But the question is whether that is really doing anything to prevent people from boarding boats. So in this show, I'm going to do a little bit of a thing of what has been happening in Brussels, also the tone and the way that those discussions are happening. And we're going to hear from some journalists that are reporting on this, Brussels-based journalists, and we'll also hear from Amnesty as well, who have been talking obviously extensively about this for many years. So on that note, David Carretta is a journalist here in Brussels who talks on this issue quite a lot and puts quite a lot of pressure on the European Commission about its coordination efforts and what it's doing amongst the EU's member states to try and deal with this. I've recorded an interview with him that I will play out. But sorry, my dog is up here. He's going on the glass. But first, I want to just show a clip of what he was the sense of what was happening in the daily briefing of the European Commission. So this is a clip from last week, and I just want you to take a listen. It's in French, but there's sort of translated, interpreted into English. So I'm just going to play this out and take a listen to what David was saying and the way in which these conversations are being had in Brussels right now.
I'm going to try to contain myself here. Really, it's very difficult to always hear the same response. I didn't hear holistic, but I did hear coordinated this time. It's tragedy upon tragedy, and every time we hear the same thing. I think it was February or March, not sure which one. You were talking about these huge results you had booked with search and rescue when the same questions were brought up. And a working group was to be set up for June. 3 months have lapsed since then. Frontex has 2 border coast guards, Italy and Greece in that area. And neither one of them intervened, even though you saw the image of 700 persons aboard a vessel in distress. So it's obvious that it's migrant traffickers who put those people on the boat. So there's a duty human and a legal duty to intervene. And so my question is, are you going to push the member states to live up to their search and rescue duty? Are you going to do carry out a Frontex search and there will always be these tragedies, but you need to try to reduce the number of victims of migrant traffickers and the indifference of certain member states. Thank you very much, David, and thank you very much for containing yourself, because this is a humanly difficult issue and a politically complicated issue, also operationally complicated. So we shouldn't let our passions take over. But I do want to make some points. The indignation in the face of this human tragedy is not the property of any one party. Given the situation, well, this doesn't stand in the way that for the Commission, and that's why the Commission, the President and the Commissioner and the Vice President issued the tweet, because we're all affected by these tragedies. It's very important to remember this.
So I think that gives a bit of an example. I think there was a bit of a technical issue there. Sorry, my internet was having a bit of a moment. But I think it's interesting to see this sort of. You can see from David's reaction, he's exasperated. We've had these kind of conversations so many times before. We've had so many questions about how to actually prevent the deaths, how to improve search and rescue, how to prevent search and rescue by private people, private ships in the Mediterranean, but also like NGO boats, how to make that legal or at least try and save lives. I'm just quickly going to bring in Beatriz Rios, who is a Brussels-based journalist as well. I'm going to play out the interview I did with David in a second, Beatriz. But what do you make of this at the moment, this discussion in Brussels, which is going down? We're in a peculiar moment. It feels like we're repeating very similar conversations we've had before in this time.
Yeah, I think this conversation is far from new. We've had it before. Before in 2006, we already had a lot of that in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic route. We saw a significant increase during the 2015 crisis, and the conversation was very similar to the one we had before. But I think probably the difference is that there is a little bit of a tiring audience. We don't seem to care so much anymore about those deaths. I remember that in 2015, we still have even demonstrations of European citizens going to the streets and saying, these have to stop, we need to take action. Whereas now we don't see that at all. It's definitely not one of the priorities of the citizens. So that makes it politically harder. But this shouldn't be a political discussion. This is a matter of human rights and respect of international law. And therefore, it's a question of just fulfilling the duties of those countries and the EU. The problem here is that I think the Commission is in a difficult spot in that it doesn't really have the power to put those search and rescue operations in place. It really depends on member states to take that action. And therefore, as much as they want to push for it, and they're not, it's going to be very hard for them to make a change.
Yeah, Beatriz, let's put this on pause for a second. It's great to have you with us. We're going to play out the interview I did with David. It's kind of long, but I think it's really interesting. Gives good insight, and I'm going to come back to you in a second. Okay, so really appreciate you just standing by for a sec. Okay, so let's play out the interview with David, who was the journalist there pressing the European Commission last week. Carly, thank you so much for joining us. As we've seen, I've just played a clip there of you sort of having a real go at the Commission, essentially, where you're telling them that they're not giving any answers or any solutions that we haven't heard before. Why aren't we getting any answers in what the authorities here in Brussels are trying to do to try and prevent shipwrecks and the tragedies like we've seen over the last weeks from happening again?
Basically because they would have to say the truth And the truth is that they are applying the urban policy in the sea. They are promoting pushbacks with another name of migrants, and they don't care if in the sea, because all the policy is to try to avoid that they arrive in Europe, and they use different means, different tactics to do that. At the end of the day, they cannot tell the truth to the people, which is we are like Orban.
Are their hands somewhat tied, though, by the member states? Is this the issue? The Commission just doesn't have a mandate from the 27 EU countries to do anything more than they're permitted to do. Is it possible for them to change?
Of course. Even the spokesperson of the Commission are starting to say that the issue is political. What does it mean? Basically, it means that what they are doing with member states, or what the member states are doing with the consent of the European Union, is the dirty job. And the dirty job is financing Libya to intercept migrants, is to allow Greece not to make search and rescue in a proactive way. When you see 750 people dying or 650 people dying in the sea, and the reaction is, well, the fault is of the traffickers. We have to work with third countries, which mean Libya and Tunisia and Turkey, and that's all. You have a problem because you are avoiding your responsibility. And your responsibility, the responsibility of member states, but also of the European Union, should be to make search and rescue in a proactive way. When they say at the beginning of their answer, our first priority is saving people life, it's not true. Their first priority is to avoid departure from Libya, Tunisia, Turkey, and so on. That's the reality of the situation.
Do you think that the EU institutions, and by this I also mean Frontex, are which is the EU's border agency, are coordinating properly? Do you think the countries actually are talking to each other properly?
They are talking to each other properly, and they are doing what they have decided to do since 2016-17, after the big refugee crisis. The strategy basically is to ask Libya, Tunisia, Turkey to do the dirty job, and they are applying this strategy. When you with Frontex too, what happened in Italy since 2017? Basically, we are financing the so-called Libyan Coast Guard. We are providing them vessels to do what? Officially to improve their search and rescue capacity, officially to save people at sea. In reality, it's just to intercept migrants at sea and to make pushbacks with another name.
Can I stop you? One of the things I think people outside, can you explain what a pushback is?
A pushback is when somebody, a migrant, a refugee, is arriving at your border and want to ask international protection, which is a human right and an international obligation for member states, and you are not allowing him to enter your country, and basically you are sending him back to a third country, and especially a third country which is not safe for him, which is the case, for example.
They're totally normalized now. It's like the open secret, right? That pushbacks are happening all across the EU's external borders. And within this case, the question is whether sort of Frontex itself, the EU's own border agency, was in some way implicated in a pushback, that they didn't support those people to get them off the boat. And it's been really hard to get answers around that. What's your understanding?
Basically, it's impossible to have the answer for the same reason of the non-answer of the European Commission. They would have to tell the truth. The truth is that, for example, with Libya, the planes and the drones of Frontex have an active role in those pushbacks. How? They are just looking at the sea, and when they see a boat, they call the so-called Libyan Coast Guard and ask them to intercept the migrants. So they have a role in all this system that was created. They have a role. They had at least a role also in Greece. We have seen images of Frontex boat pushing back migrants in Greece. So basically, they are an important part of the strategy, and the strategy is to avoid to let the people in the European Union.
One of the things you were pushing really hard on, and I think it was appreciated by the rest of us in the press pack, because it's important to know what's going on here, was this search and rescue coordination group or contact group, and exactly who's involved in this. Can you explain what your understanding is so far from the information that you've been given around this, and what that group is trying to do?
Frankly, I don't know. I know for sure that it was created for to coordinate among member states on private vessels, which means the vessels of the NGOs, and to try to limit their activities. That was the basic idea at the beginning of this working group or contact group, whatever it is. And each time there is a wreckage, the Commission come up with this working group as the solution, even if they don't discuss the coordination of member states on the real issue, which is search and rescue in a proactive way in the sea.
This is it, because we want to know who is involved in this search and rescue group, who are the member states that are involved. Like you say, the idea was that, because for much of the Mediterranean search and rescue, when they've saved lives, a lot of the boats saving lives are private fishing boats, NGO boats that are sort of often sort of collectives of charities that go down and look for people. And then there's other charities that are alerting. Do we know if they're involved? Did you get any answers?
No. They are not involved. Not the charities, not the NGOs, not even the private economic vessels or the owner of those vessels. The only people which are involved in this group are official of member states and European Commission, and the reason is to try to find a way to limit the activities of the NGOs vessels, because they are basically from Italy and other countries criminalized because they are considered as a pull factor of migrants, because they are saving people at sea, and so they are trying to find a way to limit their activities, and they call it coordination among member states. But the fact is that it's impossible to stop this flow. Let me make just an example. This year, until the end of May, 15,000 migrants crossed the Channel, departing from France and arriving in the UK. 15,000. France and the UK are two big countries, European countries, member of the G7, allied in NATO, and they are not able to stop those migrants in a small part of the coast, which is their coast. Can you imagine how Libya, Tunisia, Turkey can stop the flow in a much larger part of their coast or the sea. I mean, it's just impossible. The overall approach is basically wrong, but they cannot accept this because otherwise they would have to tell the truth to the people, the other truth, and the truth is that migration is a natural fact of life. I'm a migrant. You are a migrant.
Mm. Yeah, we live outside of where we were born. Exactly. I mean, it's really interesting, that idea of sort of catching the raindrops, especially when we look at the very recent shipwreck off the coast of the Canary Islands, which left from Agadir in Morocco, which is kind of round the corner into, it's not in the Mediterranean, so to speak, so far. I mean, it's a really far distance. They are finding any ways that they can to get through into Europe, and it's going to be, I mean, what are your predictions for this summer? What do you think? Do you think that, I mean, you and I have both followed this through, I was in Brussels from early 2014, so this was a huge thing for many years through, like you say, 2015, 2016, 2017. But now we're not going to see a special EU leaders summit this summer, do you think? We're not going to see these things like we saw back then. They don't care anymore.
But I don't know. I mean, much depends on the weather. In fact, at least for Italy, if the weather is good, people is trying to crossing the sea. If the weather is bad, numbers goes down. So. And the real problem is in fact inside the European Union, when people arrive to Italy and then move toward the north, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and so on. The big crisis in 2015, 2016 was the fact that people was moving all around Europe, and that was politically very difficult to accept. So maybe we will have a special summit if there is a huge number of people arriving, millions, 1 million. Otherwise, it will be just one of the topics of the summer. But the point is that all the solution that they are proposing, well, there is no magic bullet on this. And the solution that they are proposing, saying, well, we have a migration pact, a new migration and asylum pact. This is the silver bullet. No, it's not true. The problem will stay. If they don't depart from Libya, they will depart from Tunisia, Senegal, because there are, as you said, the Canary Islands, Belarus. I mean, there are a lot of route that can be used. And one of the reasons why we had this boat in Rios in Greece was ranked, which went down. One of the reasons is the fact that other routes are closed, and so they are taking more risk.
This is it. It was far in the west of Greece this time, which hasn't really been affected. It's mainly been the eastern islands in Lesbos and Samos, etc. And now it's right on the Peloponnese, and they didn't really know kind of what was going on. But this has happened quite commonly. The geography has changed. As soon as you shut one door, I mean, the Mediterranean may be kind of like small in the size of the globe as a sea, but it's a huge sea, right? That you can't
absolutely
police every corner of it, and especially not with such divisions between countries.
And then you have also the board on Earth, not just at sea, and you have Bulgaria, and then you have Ukraine. You have a lot of entry point if you want to find an entry point. So if you want to stop them, you cannot. That's the basic starting point. What you can do is to manage the situation. But to manage the situation, you have to have a different approach. And they don't have this different approach. They cannot accept the fact that people are coming to Europe. And why they are coming to Europe? Because we have success, we are rich, we have prosperity, we have security. Plus, we need them. If you look at the statistic of the demographic statistic and the situation on the labor market, you will discover that you need them. One of the news of the last day is the Polish government, who has decided to approve a decree which gives 400,000 working permits to migrants because they need them for economic reasons.
Yeah, I mean that's why Merkel let a million people in during 2015 as well. They needed the work. Yeah, David, listen, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you to you.
So that was great to hear from David there. Really interesting to hear his perspective. I'm going to bring Bea back in now. I think there has been some connection issues, but I think we're fine. I think my little laptop that has to work double time to try and get the camera and all the lights and everything can sometimes struggle, and especially in the heat. But it was interesting what he was saying there. And what I suppose actually in some sense, as I was watching that interview back, I was starting to think like, we're still not really, and this is my fault in that interview, but we can correct that here. We're still not massively talking about the people that are on the boats. There were a lot of people from Pakistan on the boat. We understand there were on the boat that went down in Greece. We don't know too much about the people that went down off the one that went down off the Canary Islands right now. And we are at risk of dehumanizing sometimes by talking about just the shipwreck as opposed to the people. Do you think there's dangers of that in Brussels at the moment? I don't know how you feel, because it's difficult for us. We don't get the information. The people get pulled from the boats, the survivors, and put into detention centers immediately, and we don't get access.
I think that has been the issue from the beginning, and it was the same case in the previous crisis. I think Island Kurdi completely changed that back in 2015, because it was a case that everybody could relate to when you see a 3-year-old kid dying in a shore in Turkey. That really resonated with people, because we all care about children, don't we? And that, I think it's a problem when we talk so much about figures, but we never really dig into the stories of those people. And I think what changed with the Greek case, the latest tragedy, is that we at least saw a picture. We saw a picture of hundreds of people in a boat that was on the verge of collapse, that ended up just going down the sea. And so at least we know that those people were there and we can see them. But we constantly talk about all the shipwrecks that happen every week in the Mediterranean, and we don't even know who those people are. We don't even see them. I think there has been some attempts to change that. And I think when something so big happens, there is indeed a collaboration between journalists all across the globe to trying to track down those people and try to see who they were. And as you said, a lot of people coming from Pakistan, a lot of people coming from Egypt, a lot of people coming from Syria, which is not surprising because we know there is a huge crisis. There is an interesting project going on in Spain that I think it's worth to mention, and it's called, Spanish is Caminando Fronteras, so it would be something like walking the borders. And it was a project that was actually put together by migrants that went to live into Spain, and that wanted to try to track down those people that disappear in trying to reach Europe. And it was very interesting because they would collect pictures that were sent by family members, and they would put them online just in case at some point some of those have been identified either by the police because their bodies have been found, or because they actually are alive and they are just living in Spain, but because they are in an irregular situation, they might not have been identified as a survivor of a shipwreck. And I think it was an interesting story because it poses the question, why are we not really tracking those people down? Why are we not talking about them? Because if this would happen to an European boat full of tourists in the middle of the Mediterranean, we would know everything about every single one of those people just within hours.
Right, I'm going to stop you there. I'm going to stop you there, and we're going to do this because because this is really true, though. I've tons of people on my social media have been posting about this submersion, whatever thing going down to the Titanic, and these billionaires that were on it, and this project. If you watch, you and I work for mainstream media channels. We do that, both of us, for multiple different ones. I just want to say, Beatriz Rios is one of the absolute #1 best reporters I've ever encountered in my life, and so you should follow her and follow her work. She's incredible. And both of us work for multiple different outlets, and we know the pressures. A lot of TV channels, especially in the Anglophone world, the Brits and the Americans right now are wall to wall on this this submarine thing that went to sea. And I am not in any way saying it's not a sad case, but a lot of people have been saying, listen, 700 migrants died on a boat in the Mediterranean and no one's talking about it. We're seeing, what does this submarine do? Who was on it? Profiles of each person. I have my own idea. And I'll bring that in a second. But I want to hear from you why you think that as a story is more commissionable. Because this is the truth. You and I know you have to get the story commissioned. Why are those things more commissionable than people dying in the Mediterranean in a metal coffin, essentially, huge metal collective coffin?
So one of the main things that it's obviously way harder to track these people down, because we're talking about people who are crossing the border irregularly. So we don't have access to where they were before. We don't have their documents. We can't identify. There is not a list of passengers that we can go through and try to track those people down, meet their families, talk to them. So there is let's say, practical reason why this is harder to get done. But I think there is also a human angle to it. And I think it's because most Europeans, because we're talking about Europe in this case, wouldn't relate to those migrant people who were in that boat. And what is really surprising to me, they would relate to the people who were in that submarine. And I'm saying surprising because they are billionaires who had tons of money to go and do that trip. Whereas I think that somehow we can be closer to people who are in a difficult position and maybe relate to the reasons why to jump into a boat and risk their lives. But the reality is that people tend to relate more to those people because they look a little bit like them. But what is interesting as well is that I think there is always this dramatic component to it. And obviously a small submarine that is lost in the middle of the sea trying to go and see the Titanic, it's a very juicy story for media, regardless of the human tragedy that it might be for those 5 people and their families.
This is exactly my opinion, and I'm pleased that you raise it. So I just, as an explanation from my point of view, for the record, the migrant boats are so much more important from a human perspective. That's my opinion. The human tragedy is far more significant. But from a media perspective, it's just not as juicy. Number of reasons. One, we've seen it before. It's a repeated story. And the new thing is always gets much more attention. Number two, we can, like you said, we can put ourselves into that submarine. How would we react? How would we do it? And I think we could do that with the migrant boats. And when I say we, I mean Western wealthy consumers of news that watch mainstream sort of channels. And I'm not even being critical here. I think it happens, and this is how it works. And I see this world as well. Secondly, there's just lots of angles, like you say. We can investigate, how does the submarine work? Who is the person driving it? We know lots more about them, so we can do those profiles, like I was saying. But there is also like a fundamentally racist element to it, where we do not value the life of people that have fled a country in the Middle East, in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's a sort of sense of, blame of those people that perhaps, their country fell apart and they perhaps have some individual responsibility for that. We don't know the stories, right? But I don't know. And also just the quantity of it. We've seen it so many times. You and I have both done feature reports on individual people who've tried to make their way into the European Union, followed up on those stories. Whereas this other one is just kind of, it's just a juicier story. Even like the Titanic angle, we've all watched the film, the old lady with the jewel, whatever. I think it's a really valid conversation to have, but I also think they're not comparable stories right now.
No.
If you're in a news, I always say this, like if you're in a newsroom, that like we have like slugs, so you'll have like migrant ship and submarine. And they're just two different things. There's not going to be any link between them. And you could have like, Kosovo talks, which are going on in Brussels today, for instance. It's a completely different story, and it doesn't really relate. I just want to bring in, we had a comment there. Someone posted on Twitter on this stream, just as we're going, talking about the people. They die because they cross the sea with a boat. If they stop doing it, they'll stop dying. It's as simple as that. I think it's really... It's a hard sentiment, actually, but this is how a lot of people feel.
Which is, I think it's a simplification so extreme of what actually happens. And going back to the question of how can we not relate to the situation, why would anyone risk their lives and their kids' life? Because we're talking about a lot of babies and young kids dying in the Mediterranean. Why would they do that if their situation in which they are, it's safer? And the truth is that that's not the case. It is not the case. That's why they risk their lives. When you talk about those people as if everybody would have the exact same context and the exact same situation, and they're just like stupid people risking their lives, I think that's very unfair. And I think we should be a little bit more empathic and understand that a lot of those people are fleeing wars, that a lot of people are fleeing persecution in many different ways, that a lot of people are fleeing famine. So we're talking about people who are really suffering, and they see as the only way to have a better life to jump into that boat and try to take the risk and see what happens. If you are ready to risk your life, it's because your life is definitely not worth living. So I think we should be a little bit more empathic when we talk about this, because we might not be able to relate to their a specific context, but we try to just put that into perspective, not just seeing the boat and pretending that there is no other option for them.
Exactly. I always say this, and I hate, like, personally, like, I'm not like someone that's like, go and walk in someone else's shoes and sort of, I don't want to be like some preachy reporter, but my first experiences in refugee camps and seeing some of these refugee flows really changed my mind of it. Speaking to individual stories, just some people don't know how they've managed to get there. Some people don't know, like, series of events happen in their lives which bring them to one of those coastlines. Especially when you look at the stuff that was happening in Calais and Dunkirk. Like, those people never intended to be there. They don't know what's going on. Remember, I did some reporting in northern Bosnia where there was like a lot of Pakistani and Afghanistani guys actually that were trying to get into Croatia, and they just couldn't. They were getting beaten by the Croatian police. The police denied it as a disclaimer, but and they weren't even necessarily like, you and I both moved to Brussels for our careers, right? And a lot of these guys thought that they were just like moving up, going up into a cooler, better, richer place, and they were gonna make it work. And that's the truth of it. As you say, there are a lot of mothers and babies, though, and you see that when you are reporting from these places.
But that's the interesting thing as well, as you said, and I think that we are very privileged because we get to have the experience of meeting those people and having conversations with them. And I think it's actually our duty and our responsibility to be able to translate that into a bigger audience. But the truth is that when you talk to them, you realize how much you have in common with them, how much you can relate to their stories. Even those who come from places that look nothing like the places where we live, you can relate to their emotions. And who wouldn't want to have a better life for their kids? I mean, it's just a very basic human reaction, isn't it? So I think that change, as you said, like visiting refugee camps, talking to people who have made it and people who didn't, who were struggling, as you said, in refugee camps still, makes you change your mind about the way that you perceive migration.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Spanish reaction, because this case off the coast of the Canary Islands, and there have been a few cases of this. This isn't brand new. It's sort of in the headlines right now. What's going on in Spain? There's obviously government change going on. There's an election on its way. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. Is the debate as I don't want to. Yeah, I mean, I think we can use it as toxic as it perhaps is in Italy, or as complicated as it is in Greece.
I think it is to some extent. It's true that my impression is that it is no longer the main focus of the discussion as it has been in previous elections or in other years, but it's definitely one of the points for discussion, especially with the far right. So we know that if there is a far right government, there probably is going to be a shift in migration policy. But the truth is that even with the current socialist government, we don't particularly have a much more human approach to migration. We have to recall that it's going to be the first anniversary in just a few days that a year ago, around 70 people died at the border between Morocco and Spain. And Spain has disregarded any responsibility on this case, and Morocco didn't even investigate it. So we have seen that the migration policy of frontline countries is very similar, regardless of who is in government, because we saw similar situations in Greece or in Italy. However, it's true that as you said, the last case of a street wreck close to the Canary Island happening only a few days after what happened in Greece has sort of like brought back the topic to the spotlight. And I think it might be a chance to open the conversation, but because the context is so toxic, I don't necessarily think that it's going to be for a positive change in migration policy.
Yeah, so much going on. And this is it. Until the member states can agree with each other, they'll have their internal battles politically. And then the frontline countries and the other countries, like northern and western countries in the EU, don't agree and don't have the same position. And we just carry on with the same discussions that we've been having for a decade.
There are a lot of things that resonated with me when I was listening to David. And one of them, it was what he was saying about what experts tell us is that if you close a route, then a new one would open. And that's what is happening in Spain. So by Morocco toughening up their approach to the position in the border and trying to stop migration on that particular border, then we see a significant shift into the Atlantic route. And the tragedy of this is that the Atlantic route, so the route that goes mainly from Senegal, but other countries as well, to the Canary Islands, is one of the deadliest in the world. Only in 2020, there were about half of the deaths that in the whole Mediterranean route. So keeping that in mind, I think when we do migration policy in a tougher way, and when we put the focus exclusively on controlling the borders and trying to stop people from coming, we're not stopping people from coming. We're just making it more difficult for them and more dangerous for them. So this is what is happening right now in Spain as well. And that is really something that we're probably going to experience. We're asking David as well about what happens in summer. I fear that we're going to see a lot of more people die.
Yeah, exactly. This is it. The coastlines are too big. Bea, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate you taking the time today. I know you're an extremely busy person, so I really can't thank you enough. And I hope to see you soon, mate. Take it steady.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for having this conversation that I think is very important.
Cheers, Bea. Okay, so now we'll move on. We've heard from two Brussels-based journalists, but obviously an Italian and a Spanish journalist based here. And I think this is the thing. I don't want to be too one-sided in the reporting, but the understanding in the press back is that we are going around in circles a little bit, especially when it comes to EU policy. And I think you heard that from both Bea and from David. So the next person I wanted to bring in, I spoke to a bit earlier, is Matteo de Bellis, who works. I've interviewed this guy quite a few times over the years on this issue. And a group of NGOs and charities and migrant organizations and stuff penned a letter, about 180 of them, collectively calling for more action. And this is what Matteo had to say. I'll just play out the interview now. Thank you so much for joining us. Amnesty signed up with about 180 other NGOs a letter calling for action. Can you explain exactly what this is all about?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me today. We have been calling on the European Union and its member states for a long time to change approach when it comes to dealing with the central Mediterranean and the people who are losing their lives trying to reach Europe. Personally, I've been working on this for 10 years now. And we have seen how the approach of the European governments has not improved. Actually, it went backwards. Now, this latest tragic shipwreck near Greece should be seen as a wake-up call to review the policies that have been implemented so far. The idea that we can stop people from crossing just by working with other governments like Libya and Tunisia has proven ineffective and counterproductive. It has contained people in situations of danger. It has led to people being detained, arbitrarily exposed to torture, and many other human rights violations. Meanwhile,
most importantly, it hasn't stopped the boats from coming in any sense, right? There's still the smuggling rings that the European institutions, that the European Commission says it's trying to break up. It just hasn't worked. Why not?
Because it might seem counterintuitive, but the smugglers thrive when there is a prohibition. This happens in any kind of market, including the smuggling of people. If it is so difficult and almost impossible for refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants to come to Europe through safe and regular pathways, then the people who really need to travel, they will do that irregularly. And that is making a favor to the smugglers. This is pushing people in their hands. So rather than talking about addressing the business model of smugglers, we should do that. But you don't do that just by using criminal investigations. You need to do that by opening up their market and challenging them by offering more regular pathways to travel.
So what does the letter say? What action are you specifically calling for?
So, as I just mentioned, an opening of safe and regular pathways for much bigger numbers of people are essential.
Let me stop you. What is a safe and legal pathway into the European Union? What does that look like in your mind, in your ideal world?
Okay, let me make it extremely simple. There have been 10,000 refugees in African countries trapped in Libya for a number of years. Many of them ended up in detention centers, ill-treated by the authorities. Now, UNHCR and others have been working to try to offer to these people the opportunity to travel by airplane to Europe to seek work with UNHCR and with other organizations to ensure that this kind of tools is effectively a very minuscule number of people. And why? Because European governments are just not making the numbers available.
Okay, sorry, I'm having a bit of a trouble with this video here, so I'm just gonna give it a second. Thanks for your patience. I'm just gonna bring it back up. And I'll try and restart it again.
They need
some
to
problem with
work
the audio
with
there.
UNHCR and with other organizations to and similar between European member states. And you don't do that just by.
Something's going on. Let me just remove it again. Thanks, guys. It is interesting though, so I'm just going to bring it back in. I can do it from the. Can add another one and do it from here. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll just move Amnesty on to where it was.
By airplane to Europe to seek asylum. This has been offered, however, to a very minuscule number of people. And why? Because European governments are just not making the numbers available. They need to work with UNHCR and with other organizations to ensure that this kind of tools is effectively used for refugees and asylum seekers. And similarly, for migrant workers, there should be more opportunities because we know that Europe is attracting migrant workers from outside. It's it is employing people. So why do we not invest in opening up visas opportunities for people to travel rather than just resorting to employing people who travel irregularly? This is not the way forward. The way forward is safe and regular pathways.
So we've just had a recent sort of overhaul of the asylum system, though, where countries are going to share migrants. I don't want to get into it too much, the specific details, but the idea is sort of 300,000 places and countries that don't want to take people can pay instead. Is that going to work? Is that part of what you're suggesting?
No, not really. The idea of solidarity between European member states has been replaced, as someone else has said, by derogations, by enabling countries at the European borders to work even more with other countries. And we will see in the coming weeks, unfortunately, we fear seeing new developments in the relationship with Tunisia, where the European Union and Italy, rather than putting human rights at the center of the discussion, they are just giving everything to President Sayed in order to convince him to stop refugees and migrants from taking the boats. This is not an approach that will lead very far, but it's unfortunately an approach that is consistent with also the kind of negotiations that are happening in Europe on the new pact.
But this is it. So the thing is that the institutions here, what it feels like is they're trying a tested method. With Turkey, they paid 3 billion, whatever. They were paying loads of money, different setups of money, whatever, to keep especially I think there's 3+ million, maybe 4 million people in refugee camps in Turkey. And Turkey did shut the border and stop that broadly. So that's what they're trying to do with the North African countries. With Tunisia, Kais Saied, the president, as you said, the quote is, "We will not be Europe's border guard," which is an interesting quote from him. But still, they tried to offer €1 billion, I think it was, odd in different systems and schemes to try and help the economy in Tunisia. The boat that's just sank near the Canary Islands, this left, my understanding, is from Agadir in Morocco. Is your assessment that the whole of the North African coastline is now an exit point, or has it always been that way? And does that mean that the EU needs to, what does that mean we need to do?
It's always been like that. There have been deals being negotiated with different countries over the years. Spain and Morocco have had a deal for a number of years. As you mentioned, Turkey and the European member states have had a deal since 2016. Now, these deals are not sustainable. Very often, one of the reasons is the fact that they give all the leverage to the leaders, sometimes authoritarian leaders of the countries outside of Europe that are negotiating this deal, and they can do and undo whatever they like all the time. I would remind everyone about the fact that Italy in particular has had a deal with Gaddafi 15 years ago, and that didn't lead very far. We are talking about the same issue again 15 years later. When you close a border also, this is the second element I will bring to the conversation, people will move using different routes, and smugglers will use different routes. And that means that if you shut one, you need to expect people to try to cross somewhere else. So, for example, refugees and migrants know that Libya is very dangerous. Some of them are trying to cross from Libya anyway, including because there are many people who have been in Libya for a number of years. But now we have seen in the past year how more people are coming through Tunisia. You mentioned the Canary Islands as an access point. That has been an access point for many years. But the numbers will fluctuate and change a little bit year by year. But in general, it's more that people are changing routes rather than anything else. And this shows how the approach taken so far is not really conducive to sustainable change in a positive direction.
So But they do need to engage with the countries outside of the European Union. There was lots of talk a few years ago in 2015 about the sort of landing, I think a bit later than 2015, but after, because 2015 was when there was huge movement across the Mediterranean. There was talk about landing pads, so sort of dealing with asylum requests in countries in North Africa, perhaps Turkey, and then the ones that are approved can then make their way into the European Union, be assigned a country. That would amount to a sort of safe and legal pathway, but generally, you don't think that's going to work, right?
It's probably unfeasible. Solutions of this kind have been proposed again for at least 20 years. Tony Blair proposed something like this in 2003, and still we are to see an example of this working and working positively. The problem is that most of the countries surrounding Europe that we are talking about are countries where you cannot guarantee that people are treated humanely and that have access to fair asylum procedures. And this means that it is actually not realistic to see these kind of ideas being implemented without having the results that we have seen in Libya. In Libya, something like that has been, in fact, implemented using a trick by giving the Libyan Coast Guard vessels any kind of support, a Libyan, and telling them, you stop the boats on Europe's behalf. And they did. What happened? Over 100,000 people, let me say that again, over 100,000 people have been intercepted at sea since then and taken back to detention centers where torture and rape are daily issues. This is not a solution.
I want to pick up on that just finally, because I think I remember Lampedusa happened in 2013 and I arrived in Brussels shortly after, and it was one of the sort of first stories that I covered quite extensively, following what was happening. And Lampedusa felt, I think we would not to do it down or to reduce the loss of life in any sense, but it kind of felt like a bit of a one-off. Everyone was like, oh, what the hell is happening? It was a big scandal maybe. And then we moved into 2014, 2015, huge numbers of people coming over, many reporters down there picking people up off the Greek islands. There was constant action. The subsequent years, obviously after that 1 million people that entered the European Union in 2015, the numbers have reduced a little bit, but they've plateaued broadly. But what's your sense of the way that we talk about this now, though? It feels like a real... I know, obviously, Amnesty talks from a human rights standpoint, but what's your sense of the sort of humanity around the discussions that we have related to the crisis in the Mediterranean?
So, first of all, I would say that there has been a selective attention to the issue.
This is it.
It
comes in and out, right? Depending on...
Yes, but depending on who looks at it.
And right now, there's a big ship sort of sinking to the bottom of the ocean with hundreds of people in the hull, raises it again. And you're right, our attention is back on it.
Yes, and maybe our attention is back on it, or the wider media attention is back on it. But, there are some dynamics that can be predicted. You were mentioning before the infamous shipwreck of the 3 of October 2013 in Lampedusa. That generated massive attention because the bodies were found in the sea near the island. And there were over 200 bodies recovered and taken to the island. And anyone could see them. And we remember the children, etc. Similarly, there was a big scandal in Italy earlier this year in February when there was another shipwreck in Cutro, when again bodies were found on the beach. We've seen the same with the case of Island Kurdi. When you see the bodies, people get more, look more. But there have been, meanwhile, so many other shipwrecks that have been different only in the fact that they have happened in the middle of the sea, and therefore most of the bodies have not been recovered. There were no photographers, no journalists, no one to witness that. And so all of this is happening. I could tell you, 12 April 2015, 18 April 2015, etc. We've seen so many shipwrecks across these years. It's enough is enough, really. And I'm afraid that this latest one, in Greece, the massive shipwreck, yes, it has attracted some attention, but again, it's a little bit selective also in the way we look at it. I wonder sometimes if a boat with that amount of people, but white people, were on board, if a boat like that went down in the same way, with perhaps even 100 children on board, we would react the same way? I doubt that.
We've already talked in this show a little bit about the submersive Titanic trip and the sort of false equivalence of life that is related to that, and the headlines that generates as well. So do you think there's a possibility for a change in the discussion? Do you sense any budge in the way that we start looking at this?
There are not so many signs of change, but in the past we have seen sometimes surprising moves by certain European governments. I've heard the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany talking about a European rescue mission. We have all heard from so many politicians about promises about safe and regular pathways. We just need to make sure that these are implemented and that they sit around the table and focus on these solutions rather than doing what they have been doing for such a long time, which is just talking about containment. They cannot accept this minimum common denominator politics of no one wants the refugees and migrants, and therefore we just dump them outside of Europe. And that's the only solution we can agree. This is not working for anyone. And it's not even, as you were suggesting before, leading to such massive decrease of arrivals. So we need politicians to really look a little bit more maturely at the issue, looking at the long-term perspective, and use all the tools that are available. There are tools that are available. In the past, we have seen European states being bold in launching, for example, rescue missions. Unfortunately, in the past couple of years or even more, actually, we have seen states more busier in hampering the work of the rescuers rather than supporting rescues. But is it time to change that? I think it's time.
Matteo, thank you so much for joining the show. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
So that was Matteo de Bellis, really interesting. Something that people have said is I don't bring the dog in enough anymore like he used to. So little Teddy's up here with me, struggling in the heat. He gets his hair cut tomorrow. Look at him, bless him. And he's been crying the whole way through that interview while I was trying to sort out the audio. I'm sorry, there was some sort of internet problem going on. I don't know if it's relevant to the rain. Anyway, really interesting to hear what Bea and David and Matteo had to say. This is an ongoing discussion. This has been going on in Brussels for ages. The sad thing is that we're probably likely to see more of the tragedies with the boats that we've seen. And then we will see the continued sort of confrontations with the EU institutions and with the EU member states. So I wouldn't be surprised if I do another show of this nature and talk to some more people that are following this. I really want to thank the guests that have joined. Thanks to everyone that does support this show. I'm sorry for the weeks when I can't do it. Please do like and subscribe the video, share it. I also share sort of clippings out of the show that can be the sort of headline news that people have said out of these shows. So you can see those bits on the YouTube channel. So please do subscribe and get yourself notified when I'm going live. I normally do it at 4 p.m. on a Thursday unless I feel inspired to do something new or if something's interesting. Again, thanks for everyone for supporting the show, and I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Take it steady.